Well, hey, Pete.
Oh, no, we're doing this? Welcome to season 2. Pete's ready. I was still pushing buttons. You jumped right in. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Still pushing buttons.
As we record this, you are getting just hammered in Nashville, as is most of the country.
This is true.
You okay?
We're blanketed in ice. Lots of it.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. How'd you guys do up there? You had a big old snowstorm, as did Lance. That's where our interview stopped a little early, I might add, because we were starting to get worried for him to get on the road.
He's in Seattle. I'm in Portland, and he needed to get across a pass and down I-5. And it's not an easy trip up there on a bright, sunny 80-degree day. It's just gross. Seattle traffic is terrible. So we were worried about him. We had to shuffle him out. We had lots and lots of ice, but we're used to that. Like, winter is ice here. That's what we get. It just rains all summer, all spring, and then winter is just ice. So we did fine.
Good.
A lot of people without power. I should say, we did fine. That is such a privileged thing. A lot of people, even today, it's beautiful. It's 50 degrees. There isn't a lick of snow or ice on the ground anymore. It disappeared as fast as it came in, and 100,000 people still have no power.
Yikes.
Like after 4 or 5 days. So it was incredibly destructive to our infrastructure and our poor trees, but Portland's strong.
Well, for those who have been pushing for some infrastructure upgrades over the last many years, between Texas and most everywhere else in the country, I think we've sure seen why.
Yeah, we built the case. That's good. Thank you, Mother Nature. You may go about your business elsewhere.
Right.
Gentler.
Yeah.
You know who needs your help? The Arctic.
Right. The polar bears could use your help much more than we could once you get back on up there.
Absolutely.
Boy. What'd you think of that conversation with Lance, Pete?
I feel like I need to ask you what you thought of your conversation with Lance, because you went into this feeling, what is the right word for how you were feeling going into this conversation with Lance? Is there a single word that describes that? Because we've talked to a bunch of therapists and teachers and mindfulness experts, meditation guides, and now we're talking to a political economist and communications educator.
And Professor Emeritus of all the things I don't really know very much about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the one thing that was really fun for me about talking to him was it was a little like talking to my dad, who also has a PhD in political science. And
wildly intelligent in these areas that are so far afield from my day-to-day.
Yeah. Yeah, truly. And both very patient. Very patient conversationalist, like able to kind of slow down and help me follow. And I felt like it went really well. It was a very interesting conversation about the enormous amount of change we are in, as well as the change that is so badly needed and remains elusive.
Observation. He is able to talk about things that are worth getting fired up about without getting audibly fired up about them.
Yeah.
In ways that I tend to get wound up tight.
Yeah.
Right? When he's talking about the polarization in the media, when you're asking these questions about, the MSNBC Fox News rift. And what that looks like to the populace, when you start talking about like how messages are being communicated and received, and he is able to talk about it in ways that are just frankly super chill. And I admire that, because he, like so many of our guests last season, is able to stay present in an important discussion that requires presence in ways that my emotional reaction at first blush tends to take me out of, right? Who wants to listen to me when I'm getting fired up? Nobody wants to listen to me when I'm all fired up. That is a lesson that I think is super important right now, right? So before we talk about any specific points, how he made his points is something worth hearing, and maybe hearing again.
You're right. And I mean, I guess I'd be really interested to hear how those who are more conservatively minded experienced him, because you're right. I mean, he certainly didn't rant, and he didn't get all jazzed up. But he's quite openly a more progressively minded professor of these things.
Sure. Yeah.
And I have respect for and great affection for a number of people who see things differently. But generally I see things more the way he does. And I might as well just own that right up front, because anyone can tell. That isn't to be critical or dismissive of others, but I couldn't quite tell, as we were talking about it, how well folks who disagreed with some of those points of view could stay with us versus feeling sort of dismissed. I don't know. Do you have any thought about that as a listener?
I have. Yeah, because I'm like you. I think again pretty progressive, and so but I found myself missing conversations with conservative friends and colleagues like this. Right. I think right now we're in a space where any critique of conservatives, of the Fox News message, right, all of those things, I'm saying those in heavy air quotes, because all of those things are mixed up in elements that I struggle with mightily, right? Conspiracy theories, QAnon, like trust, belief. I deeply miss having conversations with conservative ideologies, people who have conservative ideologies in my circle that we're actually about, fiscal preparedness, right? The economy, the value of trickle up versus trickle down. Like these are really how we handle the homeless problem, how we handle business growth and taxes and all of these things that aren't mired in, parties, right? And party lines. And I think that's one of the things he obviously is wound up about those things deep down. He doesn't really convey it. And I think he'd probably be better at having those conversations than I would. He certainly demonstrated that. Yeah. I was listening on mute and I found myself, yelling, sing it, Lance.
Well, I wish he were here even, 5 days later to give us his take on how that impeachment trial ended,
Yeah.
In particular, I was really just struck and a little horrified to see Mitch McConnell say, quite fiercely that Trump was responsible for a hell of a lot of what just happened here. That what he had done was ethically and morally wrong, that he had done a lot of harm and could expect to see, criminal prosecution even. But I'm not going to vote to convict because it's an unconstitutional trial. And it is unconstitutional only because I made it so on purpose. And the disingenuousness of that was just nauseating.
The problem that Mitch McConnell has is his baggage, right? His baggage is the boy who cried wolf, right? He has been provably, repeatedly disingenuous so many times over his career as majority leader that serves his ideological bent and his mission in Congress. And he did those things, right? He stacked the judges. He did the things he wanted to do. And that's good for him, good for him. But the problem is now, because of all of that, I can't hear his words as his truth. He can't sell that to me effectively enough, that he is really a constitutional protectionalist. I don't believe him.
Yeah.
I don't believe him. And that's the problem so many in the party have now when they come out, even if late at night, I imagine Mitch in his sleeping robe and his hat, and he's got his candle with the oil candle with the big thing. He looks a lot like, Mr. Scrooge.
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting at his old table, and he sits down and he's writing with his quill pen on his parchment, and he says, "Dear Diary, I get it now. I think I think I need to tell the people what I really think. I'm going to do that tomorrow. Even if that happened, I don't believe him.
Yeah.
I don't believe him. He's lost it. And that when you think about the nature of change that we have to face, and I think so much of what Lance was talking about, right? When you talk about the, the votes and January 6th and all of the efforts to stop the steal and all of those things. I mean, we have to be able to change the way people like me have to be able to come to terms with the fact that there are people of goodwill who can be trusted, and I have to figure out who they are. Because right now, I struggle with that. It happened for you and I share a dear friend whose father was in national politics for a long, long time. And I, not knowing him, I might have been able to say the same things about, just make the same assumptions about him and his work in Washington. And what I know is that he is one of those people who does put an incredible amount of thought behind his ideology, and that is precious. And I want to be with those people, those conservatives. I want to be in those circles, and I don't know where they are anymore. And I think that's the challenge that at least Lance was putting out to me and in listening to it. So I don't know. What do you think? Am I just vomiting up language?
No, I was thinking about how as soon as we ended the interview last week, I was saying something very similar to you, and I was saying I have never missed McCain more than I do right now.
Yeah.
Like I didn't agree with him all the time, but I really trusted him. I understand somebody will be able to point to his history and say, see, there he was being a politician. I'm sure there were moments where he played the strategy game, but I felt like he was a guy of principle, and he was consistent. And Bernie Sanders can be sometimes a guy I don't always agree with either, mostly his strategy more than what he longs for. But he's also a guy who's reliable and consistent and a man of principle. And he plants his flag where he means to defend it. And right now,
well, if there's anything he has going for him, and that's something that I think we need to note, is that whatever your ideological swing, if you go back 30 years and look at footage of Bernie Sanders, he's saying the same damn things.
Exactly the same things, yeah. And I really admire the handful of Republicans who are able to say, I understand this may be political suicide, and I understand this doesn't serve our party in the short-term sense of, coming out looking good. But in the long-term sense for the country and even for the GOP, I got to say what Trump did was not okay. And it's so brazenly, obviously so, that I am going to put my name behind that, even if my wife gets death threats tomorrow for it. And she probably will. And I know McCain would have been in that bunch, and he would have been leading that group saying, we can do better than this. And there was a time where, as a progressively minded guy, I was thinking, ooh, wouldn't that be great for the political gamesmanship of it all if the GOP split in half and that the people with some integrity said, we're not going to take this anymore. And now there's, since then, just in the last few days, been kind of a sadness for this country where I'm like, isn't there somebody with the guts to do it? Do they really want to hang on to power so badly that they would continue to hitch their wagon to Trump, who just last night comes out absolutely excoriating Mitch McConnell for telling the truth? Direct personal attack in every way he could. At one point, when early draft was said to have said, McConnell has more chins than he has brains. Like, really?
Yeah.
Is this like what you guys have devolved into?
Yeah. How is that furthering the conversation?
Oh, God. Anyway, it helped me to have Lance part of this, just making some sense of it. It felt like, to really make sense of it, we needed to talk to him for about 6 more hours. But I think we touched on some important stuff. Tell me about the fairness doctrine from your point of view.
I want to say one more thing, which is that, one of the things that he talked about that I think is really important is the cultural identity of America, right? This is, I think, was it stuck out to me because he was talking about that. He said that I have colleagues who have claimed that there is a kind of psychocultural pattern in America, like a cultural DNA toward violence and white supremacy, and it never goes away. And he says, I was not persuaded by that argument until lately, but I'm beginning to rethink it as a possibility that we keep reproducing in all the ways that you reproduce the bad features of culture, or maybe the dysfunctional features of personality. And I was interested in your take on that as he is talking about the cultural identity of America as it compares to the personal identity of the brain.
Wow. Can you read it again? I even wanted him to say, yeah. Can you have him say it again? Because you got some cool tech that might.
Let's see what happens here. This will be we're going to roll the dice with this. Here you go.
At least I would like to believe in progress and that we could learn from those dark periods in our history. And the Civil War is, I guess, the darkest, and the aftermath of it. But it appears that there, I have colleagues who claim that there is a kind of a psychocultural pattern in American. It's sort of in the cultural DNA of America toward violence and white supremacy, and it never goes away. And I don't know. I was not persuaded by that argument until lately, but I'm beginning to rethink it as a possibility that we keep reproducing in all the little ways that you reproduce the bad features of culture, or maybe the dysfunctional features of a personality.
That was the passage.
First of all, it's completely insane that you could pull that up right on the fly without even hitting pause in our editing. But okay, that's wild. Pete has cool gadgets, you guys. It's really neat. Okay, so here's some things that come to mind. The first thing that pops to mind is Maya Angelou's beautiful phrase, when people show you who they are, believe them. I do have a sinking feeling that, there is an element of American culture. There's a part of the complex personality of who we are that really wants to say, I'm not kidding about this. I mean it.
Yeah.
It makes me think of a few things. One of them is, we developed this show with a curiosity about how change comes about and a suspicion that some of the most interesting, most powerful, most effective elements of change are not driven by force. You don't just hammer change through because you're sick of it being the other way, that often, you convince by listening, let's say, that soft overcomes hard, as they would say in Taoism, and so on, right? And I'm having this fear that those elements may not just soften. Mm-hmm. That I know how to work with an individual who's racist and get to teach me about how the world taught you to fear that person. And when they feel heard, something begins to shift. I don't know how you do that for millions, right? Yeah. Who either openly cheer Trump on or are willing to look the other way when he cages brown children, because it's better than having those rapists in our country or something, right? I mean, I don't, how do you have that conversation with 75 million people who voted for him, especially when they voted for him for a whole range of reasons?
Yeah.
And if they're not going to change their minds, what do you do then? Do you just do what they're afraid Democrats will always do, which from our point of view, we do way too little, and from their point of view, we do too much, which is just to say, now that we've got power, we're just going to ram this home. We just will not stand for that shit anymore. We're going to do something else. Is that what it's going to take? Because that's not the way I normally see lasting change work very well.
And that's where we are right now. We're in a yo-yo position.
Right. We go from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, boing, 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 boing. Yeah. And you're already hearing Lindsey Graham saying things like, if we take the House, we're going to move to impeach Vice President Harris.
Yeah.
Like on zero grounds at all. Like he's already just saying
just
it to
for
say
politics.
It. Right.
Yeah.
Like I worry about us. And I also think about our, so let me just to finish that point. I wonder if Lance, is teaching us sometimes change doesn't come about the way we on this show suspect it does. I don't know. Or maybe we haven't yet sorted out how does that show up in a group form. I don't know. And then finally, back to your question of like, what do I make of that passage right there, and the idea that maybe this element of American culture hasn't evolved. It's not just a wave that's moved through us around the time of the Civil War. It's back because it's perennial. It's going to keep coming back.
Because it never lasts.
Then I just think about, Carl Jung and the shadow. Like, is this like kind of human shadow work coming to the surface? Like fighting with that part of us of all of us, whether we want to be conscious about it and work with it and, speak back to it, or we just want to run with it. But there's a part of all of us that says, I don't understand that, therefore I fear it, therefore I condemn it, therefore I dehumanize it, therefore I can do whatever I want to it.
And that's the big question right there, because when I hear, as a guy who I think of myself as a progressive person, when people tell me that there are murderers and drug cartels coming across the border, there is a little tiny voice, that lizard brain voice in the back of my head, that is telling me you should run, right? That the amygdala fear almond is saying, get out, because there are murderers and drug cartels coming across the border. And I think I'm starting to feel like there's the spectrum is that there are people who hear that and are not able to stop and say, wait a minute, is that rational? Do we have data to back that up? Is there support of that? And when we hear that support, can we stop and say, wait, does that seem rational? Does this support seem, can we feel that? And that's the spectrum. People who hear the fear and run and believe immediately without questioning, and people who are automatically so cynical that they don't believe anything. And somewhere in there, we have the cultural populace of America. Like, the reason fear and racism and all these things don't go away is because they never went away, because they're in all of us at some level.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the part that bakes my noodle. I can't get to the other side of that. It's really frustrating.
And the question is, so if we've all got that, like, where does empathy play a role, if at all? Like, is there a moment where we can remember their humanness too? Because, okay, so a few points here. One was, is there the data to back that up? Well, it depends on what you call data.
Right.
That used to be a scientific sort of process, right? An objective kind of data, a real accumulation of actual statistical fact. Best we could come up with it in an objective way. But nowadays it's, well, yeah, I have an anecdote of this one guy who came across and he did hurt somebody.
Yeah,
of course,
and
you
suddenly
do.
That becomes
because
data.
If they've come across in huge numbers, there are also future Nobel Prize winners who've come across.
Right.
In fact, one of the people who came across was, my dear girlfriend from the time you and I were hanging out in Boulder, Anna Lee. She came across on the shoulders of her uncle as a little girl from Mexico and was grandfathered in years later, blessedly. And she would have been one of those kids in a cage.
Yeah, she would have been in a cage.
Instead of going on to become an extraordinary student and an amazing doctor and a beautiful, beautiful human being. She would have been in a cage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do with that? That's hard. So part of what it speaks to for me is like one of the topics we talked about with Lance is, what do we do now in this the disinformation age, where science has become highly suspect for some reason, where we can't just trust that process. And increasingly for me, I worry that our attention spans have become so short that we don't have a lot of patience for science anymore. Especially because science can't come up with a single answer the first time out. You run a study and then you run it again and then you run it again and then you run 57 variations on it and then you learn something major new 10 years from then and you have to run it again with the new information and you go, uh-oh, maybe that would have come out differently if we'd known that. And then you start running those again. Like science is a slow, patient, painstaking approximation, as you inch toward a reliable foundation of truth. We don't want that shit anymore. We just want a great opinion that was backed by a telling story, and that's enough.
I may be more optimistic about our future, knowing that we have a lot of strife to go through to clean up the mess that we've made of ourselves. And it starts in the, decades ago, right? When we started making this mess. But I really see it as like we're in the middle of a stage of evolution right now, right? We're evolving. Yeah. And the age of disinformation, right? We're in the dark. These are the dark ages. But like the Great Awakening comes after that. Right. Something changes and we wake up and we're new people. We're a new species. And we are able to see things in a different way. And I feel like we just happen to draw the short straw and end up in one of the darker periods of the Anthropocene. And that's our lot. It's our lot to push ourselves forward and get to the other side of it. But we have to stop undoing these absolutely damaging decisions that are based on just super short-sighted the impacts. So we talked about, you asked about the fairness doctrine, and so you guys talked a little bit about that, and the way it was ripped apart and the impacts on broadcasting. And in many respects, the fairness doctrine both would not have played a significant role in today's disinformation or misinformation age. And in others, you can really chart a path that says, when in 1987, when they canceled the fairness doctrine, in a vote that was 4-0 to stop the fairness doctrine, that in fact, the culture of online media was so determined by broadcast media that, in fact, we would not be here today had we had a culture that represented fair and balanced, true, fair and balanced reporting in political discourse. We don't have that anymore. And this election cycle is absolutely demonstrative of that. It was a dumpster fire of debates and discourse and lies, and it was terrible everywhere. If you want to start rebuilding trust, you got to start at the place that says, okay, the American people need to be able to trust the information they're getting from the sources from which they are getting it. Yep. And right now that's broken. That's the next stage of evolution for us.
It sounds like one of the things that needs to get publicized much more widely is whatever group that was that worked hard to rate all of the different media sources according to their, balanced and fair coverage. But, as I say that, even if everybody believed that 100%, I'm not sure how many folks care. Like, almost anybody who watches Fox News or MSNBC knows that PBS and NPR are closer to the center.
Mm-hmm.
But how many people who watch those two care?
Yeah, and this is where I think it gets touchy when you start looking at sort of regulation, a regulated approach to this, because the issue is not whether or not, like, let's just paint a picture of what it might look like. That there is dare I say, maybe something like the Federal Communications Commission, for example, and maybe they have a regulatory arm and they are able to say to broadcasters, to media, hey, you need to present this information because we know that the market approach is not working. The market approach got us where we are right now. The market approach got us Facebook's news algorithm that is so reviled. Like, the market approach got us there. And all of these advocacy groups that are trying to trickle up, trying to push up awareness, it's not working because nobody cares. What we have to do is create a playing field where all of the media is regulated, balanced, so that when you go to Fox News that there will be consequences to editorialists masquerading as journalists, right? Mm-hmm. There are consequences to how that is packaged, so that we can retrain our brains to what is and what is not truth, right? That is a universe in which, like, that's kind of where we were in the 70s and 80s, right? Like, that's where we were until the Fairness Doctrine was repealed.
One way that was handled was with the cigarettes, where those companies used to say, how dare you claim that your science is better than our science? The tobacco industry has found that tobacco is perfectly fine for the body. In fact, it's good for you. Look at this and look at this study, right?
Yeah.
And the government said, you're full of it. And you know it, and so do we. And so this will be printed on every single pack of those things you sell.
Right.
Just so you know, everybody, you can smoke this, but it's going to kill you. In, other words.
Until we have a new standard, a truth in advertising, a truth in broadcasting, like...
Maybe you have a ticker tape that runs across the bottom of Fox News and MSNBC and whoever else is putting out stuff that isn't very balanced that says... viewer discretion. This is not news. This is entertainment.
This is editorial content.
Right.
Yeah.
They have not followed any of the protocols as set up by the Bipartisan Commission, so-and-so.
Yeah.
Beware, this is not news. This is entertainment. And then, under something that has passed that, it would say, this has been certified to be accurate and balanced news.
It's an interesting thing. I think Twitter and Facebook actually ended up, because of public pressure, I think they ended up doing kind of the right thing by starting to flag, posts as untrue, right? The thing that you're reading right now is provably otherwise. So read at your own risk. I think that's actually pretty good. I am curious, and I have no information on this, but I'm really curious at whether or not that worked and that allowed people to kind of wake up a little bit and realize that they might not be seeing things that are true, or if that just aggravated the people who needed to see it the most. If that just made them mad.
It's a really good question. Be a very interesting study, and are we interested in getting there? Now, I have, friends who are a little more conspiracy-minded, who trust the government a little less than I do. And they would say they're never going to do that because it's important to them that they keep the country completely divided.
Yeah. I think that it's dangerous to bundle government as a four-letter word, right? I think it's really dangerous. We are a group of individuals that if we want to move anything forward, we need government. We need legislative bodies.
Work.
We need cooperative work. We will not heal if we don't embrace that one single fact. And if you haven't gone out and read a little bit of Anand Giridharadas, he does some incredible writing and thinking on this, and that's his call too. I'm pilfering it straight from Anand. We have to have government. Let's take that as table stakes, right? Because whether you want a smaller government or a bigger, more protective government, a safety net government, you want a government, and you want a government to work. If you say, I don't trust government, I hate government, then what you're saying implicitly is all of the services that I count on, I don't care about anymore. And I don't think you mean that. I think your conspiracy has clouded your reality. And let's at least talk about it as if it hasn't. Because we want roads, we want stop signs, we want schools, we need government. Yeah. You might not trust Mitch McConnell. You might not trust Joe Biden. But that doesn't mean give up on government. Don't give up on government.
Right. It's a process that can work beautifully. Part of why it's easier for me to trust it is because my father and stepmother worked their entire careers, for the Agency for International Development and did amazing government work. Truly brilliant people working with other truly brilliant people to do their absolute best. And I worked a summer up on Capitol Hill as a congressional intern, and I met some people who, in my experience, were really, really working hard to do the right thing. And often unfortunately, with our short attention span and with the absolute massive amount of information it takes to understand any one issue, it's easy to oversimplify the issues in our minds and therefore the solutions. And especially if we get, pushed that direction by a news source that's not very biased or that is biased and doesn't look at the nuances of a problem, it's hard to go, yeah, but this is complicated.
Yeah.
And it often is.
Yeah. Yes, and.
Yep. If you serve on even one little board of directors for your condo association or something, you start looking at some things where you're like, oh, I get why all those people think this is a simple solution, but it turns out you got all these other considerations they don't even understand. Dang.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. A lot of what looks like conspiracy is just really hard problems to solve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we are.
It's still really painful to see the disingenuous stuff creep in when it just turns into gamesmanship. Like, yes, we'll have an impeachment trial, but not till after then. Oh, well.
Oh, by the way, now it doesn't count.
Yeah, by the way, that's unconstitutional. So sorry about that. We totally would have convicted him, but that's not, come on.
Yeah, that's hard to swallow for sure. But it is part of the process. It's part of the sausage.
It's part of the sausage.
I would hate if that kind of mistrust because of this history of disingenuousness would get in the way of quality people trying to do the right thing by running for office, right? If you really don't trust it that much, run for office. Make some change.
Right. Well, thank you to Lance Bennett. I want to say one more time to everybody out there, Communicating the Future, Solutions for Environment, Economy, and Democracy is a cool book and worth checking out. Written by a really cool dude. And really thank you to Lance out there for his time coming to talk with us about some big things.
I hope he comes back. You think he'll come back? Seemed like he would come back.
Heck yeah. I bet he would.
There's
a lot to talk about. It's ever changing.
Good talk, Dodge.
All right, man. Love you, buddy.
Love you, buddy.